No, I usually would end up forgetting it in the flow of all the things that I have to say. So I'd like to take a minute or two, because I have time. Uh, Firstly, to thank the orchestra that was put together. Right? The children were just amazing. The sheer flow with which they were doing it. It brings everything to focus, right? We can talk all of these gallant things, from the ivory tower, talk about how this should be and how that should be and how the NEP should be and so on and so forth. But one thing that orchestra helps you do is root you and bring you back to the center, say that we're doing it eventually for these people. And what we're doing is for them. So, if at all there's a temptation to get on a high horse, they're very good at bringing us off that thing. So firstly, that. Then to Sanvi, Deepak Madhurti and Bharti, amazing. It's really like the sun, right? The sheer grand generosity and hospitality that your entire team, and definitely led by yourselves, has put together. I said it yesterday, I say it today. You've definitely won me for the rest of my lifetime. I will be saying it every time I can, if I have to cite how hospitality and generosity should be. So that's been fantastic. The interesting thing about this presentation is that, of course, I had points and I had notes that I put together. And then throughout the talks that happened since morning, I had many more points put together, which would probably require another 45 minutes. So I'm not going to do that. I kind of sort of try to interleave. No? Okay. Okay, cool, thanks. So the topic that I would be talking about is the Panchakosha, right? We've heard this enough number of times. This is the new kid on the block. Everyone's talking about Panchakosha. At the time of the IT boom of sorts that happened back in the 90s, right? I remember in Hyderabad, everything was called high-tech or cyber. There was actually a cyber bakery, and there was a high-tech men's salon, right? Well, those were days when I would subscribe to a men's salon, not today. But those, and I didn't understand what's high-tech. It's just the same scissors and comb, and the bakery was still the same, but it was always high-tech and cyber. So Panchakosha is kind of enjoying its moment right now. The important thing that I'd like to connect with, why I want to get into the Panchakosha is, it's a very opportune moment. It's not about us suddenly realizing that there was a Sanskrit word like this. Yeah, it's Panchakosha, don't worry, the spelling's the same. So the point that I'd like to get to is, we're all thinking that it's about this government's initiative to bring in Sanskrit words, right? Or there is some other agenda, so on and so forth. The point is that these things existed, whether you wanted it or not, whether you were taking it or not, it existed. There was an immense value to it. We have chosen to believe that it's only from outside that we can get direction to understand what value is, right? And that's we of course, the other favorite person everyone loves bashing up is Macaulay, but leave that individual aside, right? We've, as a nation, we've stopped believing in what this land has produced, right? I'm not talking about communities, I'm not talking about individuals, I'm talking about this whole space. There was a reason for which this was called, this space was considered to have a spiritual thought, right? And a lot of things, now we're back, let's get back to the presentation. So it's important to understand that these things existed, whether you want to take it or not. But why is it opportune now? Because when we're talking about AI, right, everyone's scared about AI. No one really has a full understanding of what AI is. My background's in computer science, right? And even with that, I do not ever try to claim that I have a complete understanding of artificial intelligence. That said, people are afraid of it, A, because they don't understand it. And then they say, oh, it's going to take away your jobs, it's going to change everything, ChatGPT. That's not the only. ChatGPT is an application of AI. AI is a much more vast space. All right, let's first understand that. Now with AI in, there's one thing that a lot of very, very deep thinkers are doing. They're not asking what would AI do. They're asking, right? With all due respect, any and every job can be replaced by AI. especially the transactional ones. The question is not that. The question is, okay, so what is it that is viscerally, very, very fundamentally human? So you have to go into the essence of things, right? And when you go into the essence of things, you realize that there are three things that are very, very you that can't be done by the person sitting next to you. Forget about AI, right? One is the experience. When you had the gulab jamun during lunch, you had it. There was nobody else who was having it for you and telling you what it felt like. There's just no way to do it, right? So there's the experience. Once you've had the gulab jamun and then you start having guilt pangs like, yaar, kal to 100 gram bad gaya, all those kind of things, you're reflecting. That's you again. Nobody else can reflect for you. That's the second aspect. No AI can reflect for you. Reflection is not a capability of artificial intelligence. Okay? Why? Because artificial intelligence in its crux is basically historical data and patterns extracted out of historical data built into automation. Right? So there is that element. The third one, which is very important, is the spirit of you. We've heard folks in the armed forces talk about what they carry in them. Definitely there's the Kavach Kundal, but the Kavach Kundal is for the spirit. That spirit is unique. There cannot be an AI or even your neighbor who can carry your spirit in them. So there are these three things. But again, we keep looking to the West. 10 years ago, we would not admit SEL into schools. 10, 15 years ago, we said we have no time for SEL. Suddenly, SEL, CASEL, everything became a big framework out there, and we have to do SEL. No one's talking about the spiritual development of the child. We have always done that. That was the craft. That's why the texts of this land are very intermeshed between the subject, the methodology, the spirit, your position in society. How does the same thing connect with you, the society, the larger ecosystem, and a bigger pattern that's there? This whole thing that we're all jumping onto the wagon of holistic learning and interconnected learning and multidimensional, that is always there. Because for instance, in those days, that's the only way to learn. It was not an option. It was not saying, if you want to do unidimensional learning, go there, and for multidimensional learning, come to this ashram. It was never that sense. And it is not just, again, there's a typical notion that the Gurukula system was for the Brahminical community. That's also not true. Every community had its kula. There was a guru, and that guru's way of thinking and embodiment was the kula. So the Gurukula was the embodiment of that guru. And it existed for all communities, everything. They all had their ways, but they all approached it in a multidimensional way. Right? Now with all of these pieces in place, when I see the description of the Panchakosha made in NEP, right? And then there is a kind of a making it accessible attempt that's being done, right? So you're simplifying it and trying to make it accessible to the reader. In the process of that, my placement is that there is an oversimplification that's happened. So how do I respond to any new piece of information that comes? I go to the source. I go to the source, try to understand it, and then read all the commentaries that have existed to get a better understanding and then form my own understanding, right? Now this is again part of what we're going to talk about. So we've talked about spirit, we've talked about what makes us unique, we've talked about holistic and interconnected learning, we talked about going to the source. There are other aspects of learning that we keep talking about. We've heard about it, but we don't do much about it. Is things like dialogic learning, right? Where you talk about Socratic dialogues and things like that. It's a technique that we talk about, we don't encourage that. Our assessments are still written. We will not accept very commonly an oral assessment, where I've just had a dialogue with you, you and me, and then at the end, I give you an assessment of how that dialogue went. That's not yet admissible. Whereas a lot of children, students I'm sure, would say, it would be so much more fun if we just had a dialogue and I could tell you how much I understood this thing. But no, we'd like the definitions to come out and compare the following and differentiate and give 5 reasons for World War I and things like that. Right? So with all of this context, I'll move on. So when I go to the Panchakosha, the roots, How many of you are familiar with where the Panchakosha came from? This is a show of hands. The Ayakas. No, I won't ask you, so don't worry. You can throw your hands up if you have a rough idea. If you don't, okay, cool. So let's take this up, right? So the Panchakosha is part of an Upanishad. It's called the Taittiriya Upanishad, right? Now the Taittiriya Upanishad also has a very interesting thing. Where did its name come from? It's a bunch of partridges. Partridges were called Taittirias, right? So there is a reason why it is called the Taittiriya Upanishad. And in the Taittiriya Upanishad, depending upon who you subscribe to as the commenter, there are three parts to it. There is Shikshavali, there is Anandavali, and there is Bhriguvali, right? The one in between is also called as Brahmanandavali, right? I know this is very academic, but the reason why I'm doing this is so that I give you as much as information that I have, concise, and let you think about what you want to make out of Panchakosha, right? The NEP has chosen to make it in a different way. I'll present that too. So you can choose which one works for you. So first thing, yes, it's about the Taittiriya Upanishad, and that is how it is, right? And the Upanishadic way of teaching is also something. And before I go to that one, it's a philosophical exploration. It's not about whether this is to be used in the growing ages, or what does it mean, like, what is the nutrition plan that you should have. It's nothing prescriptive, right? It's a philosophical exploration. And I brought in all the passages from the Taittiriya Upanishad for you, so don't worry, you'll get to read them along this discourse, right? The other part is that it's very true to the Upanishad way. It's dialogic. If you notice in most, like even as Dr. Pandey said, right, the Viveka Chudamani, whether you pick up that one, you pick up any of the Upanishad, it's usually a dialogue, right? It's a dialogue between an animal and a person who's asking something. It's between a guru and a shishya. It's between a father and a son. It's between it's usually a dialogue, right? And why is that done? Because when you go to the Pramanas, the ways of knowing, there are certain ways. Like if I throw this at someone, if you're sleeping through this thing, you will feel it. If you're awake, you would have seen it coming to you. You've got certain things that are accessible to the Pratyaksha Pramana. That is things that I can see, sense. These things are not for that. And that's like how Lata Ma'am did as well. Certain things are just much more accessible when it's poetical, or it's like a Zen Kwan, right? It's like when in a Zen Kwan one would say that the minute you declare that you've understood, you're ready to be the student. So it's just like, it's sort of these sort of Zen Kwanish things, right? And the Upanishads intended to keep it that way so that the exploration continues. Not because they wanted to ruin your day. It's essentially because they said that the exploration has to continue, right? So if you look at this much and say this is the introduction to the Panchakosha, and this is what it is, we'll look at the verses as well. The next question is, wait a second, why are we doing this in school, right? Because one of the common objections that you would have or a response, is like, oh, it's philosophy, we don't teach philosophy, we're done. I have a syllabus to complete, right? The next thing that you'd see, because this has been brought in the NCFFS, they say, oh, this is for ECC. I'm teaching different grades, so Panchakosha doesn't apply to me, right? The third response that you might have is, oh well, the NEP, they have mapped to things like physical development, socio-emotional development, cognitive development. So I'll just take those these five Panchakoshas, is just difficult to pronounce also. So I'll stick to the English version of it, right? You could choose to do that, and right? But this is the approach that I prefer to take. The approach is, first of all, because it's philosophical, and like in every other part of the Upanishads, they are revealing something to you. They're revealing a pattern of progressing cognitively, emotionally, spiritually, right? And is there a way by which we can find out that pattern and use it in our educational experiences? That's the question that I asked of the Panchakosha, and what came back as answer is what I'm going to be sharing with you. Yeah? So the first one, just for the first thing, because there's a lot of coverage, so just the first one, I'm going to play the verse, and you'll also get the second stanza has got the words for it. Students, it's not lyrics. the mantra. Yeah.
आगासात् वायोः वायोरग्नेः अग्नेरापः अभ्यः पृथिवी पृथिव्या वोढदयः वोढदेभ्यो अन्नम् अन्नात् पुरुषः.
Right? And this is important. They just did not say, you know what, finally we have to say Annat Purusha. Let's just put anything else in between. They didn't do that. They went on a very systematic way. And this, by the way, is a result of a tapas. The whole story behind this Upanishad will tell you. Another important thing, just sorry, on aside. The first chapter is the Shikshavali, but none of that is being used in the NEP. It's very interesting if you think about it. A lot of the Taittiriya Upanishads direct messaging around how a student should be, what is the student ecosystem in the learning, and what are the qualities that you should have, are there in the Shikshavali. We have not touched that in the NEP. It's gone to the Brahmananda Valley and we've gone into the Panchakosha. And in the Panchakosha, the first one, talks about how Akashat Vayu. He just didn't say, you know what, there is Akash Vayu, there's a bunch of things, and then went Annat Purusha. Because that's all I have to tell you, right, at the end of the day, because all that you want to say, eventually, let's focus on the physical development of the kid. Annat Purusha is not to be translated, in my opinion, as physical development of the child. They have absolutely zero correlation. I don't need to go into tapas to figure that out. Right? So, what does this say? There's ether, and if you look at it from a historical point of view, how the earth was created and all of that stuff, you'll start seeing a lot of correlations. Right? So there is Akashat Vayu, there was ether, there was substance, which when gravity pulled it together, started creating enough gravitational force for air to exist. Now, why is air most important? Because Vayu Agni, without the supporting matter, oxygen, I cannot have heat or combustion or any form of energy transformation. Look at the assembly, it's very, very clear. It's extremely clear, there is no doubt about it. It says Akashat Vayu. Why? Because Vayu Agni. Why Agni? Okay, chalo, you give me Agni. Then Agnir Apaha. Wait, that doesn't make sense. Shouldn't water come first and then there should be fire? The very energy required to combine your molecules into water, then have the water cycle, of which heat is an extremely important part, is only possible if you have Agni in place. Without Agni in place, the whole concept of the point of having Vayu, of Apaha, which is water, doesn't make sense. And when this water reacted with Prithvi, and please, let's just take a minute and appreciate the beauty of the thought process that is what was there ancient. Adya Prithvi, Prithivya Oshadaya. They didn't say, from Prithvi we got food. Well, now we got water, we got air, we got sunshine, everything is done. Oh, photosynthesis, plant, food. Very simple, very scientific. Right? They didn't say that. They said, Prithivya Oshadaya. Oshadebhyo Anna, Annat Purusha. Right? And again, the Purusha is not men or male, it's the Purusha Prakriti of the Sankhya philosophy. Right? So please bear in mind, this is not a male chauvinistic view of how the world was formed. This is about Purusha and Prakriti. Okay? Because that is what they're focusing on. The spirit. Because why? This whole exploration is of the spirit. Prakriti has a role to play when we come to the Manomaya. But the Purusha is the one that's going through transformations, which is in the Sankhya philosophy. Now, why Prithivya Oshadeha? There is a Subhashita, which is sort of like the Aesop tables or Jataka tales or whatever you want to call it, which goes as Amantram Aksharam Nasti, which means to say there is no sound in this universe that cannot be converted into a mantra. There is no sound. Absolutely nothing. Even the most annoying sound of a chalk screeching on a blackboard can be converted into a mantra. Right? The same thing is, there is no substance, there is no matter that cannot be converted into Aushadaya. Aushadaya is not medicine, right? It's really anything that heals and nurtures. Right? There is no substance that cannot be converted into that. Similarly, the Subhashita continues, there is no human being who's useless. to declare someone as utterly useless, if you have heard it from your teachers or your spouse in their state of anger or whatever it is, don't believe that, right? And the Subhashita ends by saying, what is missing is that person who can do this transformation. That is from sound to mantra, from substance to aushadha, from a Purusha to a very yogada, someone who is very capable of something. That person is usually an educator. So similarly, they say first thing that gets produced is aushadha. And a subset of that is something that you consider edible as a food that's required for your nourishment. Because the same thing which you might not eat is food for some other creature. Are we clear? So hence it is always aushadha, and then it comes to anna. Annat purusha. Good, you're following, good material for a snap. Okay, right, let's just go on. So at this stage, what is it that as an educator I would go into? As an educator, I would go into, when I'm approaching material, I'd say, now what is that absolute core without which this thing cannot even be conceived of? Only with this in place can this be conceived of. What is that? If I am willing to lead my students into exploring like that, then I have walked down the path of the Panchakosha. Now you'd say, wait a second, who would possibly? You just not say it's philosophical. Where is it applicable? Thank you. This thing which is not letting me see anywhere, let's just pick up light. Optics. I'm studying optics, right? 7th grade, 8th grade, whatever. And then I'm studying this and I say, okay, we start with the sun typically. So you show, there is a source of light, here is this thing, here is shadow, here is reflection, la-di-da, right? Now a curious student says, wait a second, why is that producing light? Oh, it's the sun. Like, yeah, but why is it producing light? Oh, because it's very hot. So it's like, okay, I had fever, I was not producing light. And that's around when the teacher runs out of steam and is not able to go further. But if you are able to, you will notice that everything eventually, if you keep going why, you'll notice eventually it's just a matter of energy exchange, heat levels, atoms. Any 12th grader here? 11th, 12th grader science? Are you people scratching your head or raising your hand? Okay, cool. So you've studied about atomic level, energy level falling. Electrons go up, and when they fall back, they release electromagnetic radiation. Some of it is visible. So technically, when I had fever, I was releasing EM waves. You just couldn't see it. Anything that's not at absolute zero releases electromagnetic radiation. It's just that you can't see it. This sort of an exploration is what is being encouraged here. Okay? Then you have the next circle of the petals fall. This is the verse. This is what it goes on to. The focus part is the Anyonantara Atma Pranamaya. It's not that, oh, what is the next thing that we do? Oh, let's do social emotional skills. It's what is the next sort of sheathed Atma, and that is this. If you see it right up there. I have no clue why this is not working. If you see, I don't know if you can spot it here. The second paragraph right here, it says Anyonantara Atma Pranamaya. Right? Now, if you take up a petri dish view, a petri dish view is where I can sit and assemble elements. I can make that into a cell. Right? Materialistically, it is a cell, which is what I did with the previous chapter. But what is it that gives it life? What is it that makes it move around? There is a project that's ongoing, the Build a Cell project. It's across countries. They have not been able to crack it. The whole thing of how do you just bring life into a cell is something they've not yet figured. Largely everything that's happening is cloning, by the way. Right? I have something that's functional, I clone it. But right from scratch, how do I get to it? I don't know. And that which brings life into whatever it is that you're exploring, what is it that brought vitality to this? What is it that caused movement? What is it that caused this to become alive? That exploration is when you go into the Pranamaya Kosha. Am I making sense? Now let me give you an example. Let's take science off, because science and maths usually is what everyone gives examples of. Let's pick up history. Alright, we had World War I. 8th grade, 9th grade. When is it that you studied World War 9? Yeah, 1 or 2 worst cases. Oh, no, I meant 8. Yeah. So, what happened? What was the cause? Okay, I'm not going to spot you, don't know, she poor thing. Anyone? What was the cause of World War I? What is the stated cause of World War I? And then I'm supposed to say, yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay, so this is an answer from all of us.
Oh, really? So I wouldn't blame you then? Yeah, that's cool. Thanks. That's perfect.
So
Yeah,
you
that's
shouldn't
it.
take, right?
Yeah, goes like that.
After the changes that France had introduced, it started introducing it into the entire Europe, and there was the feeling of nationalism there, and that eventually somewhere led to World War I.
Cool, but there was a trigger. There's something that is popularly called a trigger. I suppose textbooks still call it a trigger. What is that trigger?
I have friends who will answer this.
Yeah, good.
It was imperialism, the Balkan issue, that's what it's called.
Okay.
It was an area under Austria-Hungary Empire and it wasn't taken over. So imperialism and nationalism together led to World War I.
Okay, so can I say something where everyone immediately says, yeah. Alright? The assassination of the Archduke. How many of you are familiar with these couple of words? Everyone keeps saying this is the assassination of the Archduke which happened, which led to the German-Austrian-Serbia war. That happened, right? That's a trigger. Now realize one thing, if I just randomly go tomorrow, I won't, but if I go tomorrow, pick a random country and I kill their leader, do you think there can be World War III? Anyone can answer this question. Okay, this is how we buy time also and then hope for the bell to ring. So here's the question. If I go and randomly kill the leader, or whatever, the Archduke was never really a leader, but anyway, Archduke or anybody else, if I go randomly kill that person in that country, do you think I can trigger World War III today?
So not the World War III, but it would actually trigger the people over there. They would be angered that how could you kill the leader over there?
Agreed, right? So that is all that should have happened during World War I also.
Yes.
Why did the war happen?
Sir, it was because the area, the Balkans that we mentioned, the area there, the people were having small fights, and when united, there was a big fight that occurred, which immediately led to the World War I.
Yeah, so we have some very loving neighbors around us,
Yeah.
right? So if I went and killed some minister of parliament or something random person out there, we are having all the things that you said, though it's not the Balkans anymore, would it trigger the World War number 3 or 2.5, 2.75, whatever you want? Would it happen?
No, I
No.
don't think.
You don't think so? I'm glad you don't think so. I'm glad it doesn't happen. The reason is that, and that kind of an exploration is what this is. When you go into the substance and you keep asking, okay, wait a second, that just one thing couldn't have done it. Something else gave it life. What was it? So there was nationalism. There was already the formation of a lot of military armament. There's a lot of the war chests were getting filled up. There's a lot of preparation for just a trigger. And all that was missing was the trigger. The trigger was something so random. There was a bomb thrown at him in the morning. It missed. And then he was shot at it later in the evening. The gentleman didn't realize that when the bomb was thrown, he should have stayed at home. But yeah, so there's a lot of these things, right? And that's where this sort of an exploration, I'm giving you subject level stuff, right? So that you realize that this is all not philosophy. Any subject you can take up and you can go into such depth if you want to. This methodology is available to you. You use it, you don't use it, it is up to you. And this is the question that you'd ask. What is it that brings about a vital movement in what we're doing? Okay? The third one, which goes into Manomaya, right? And this is the verse which basically says Anyonantara Atma Manomaya, which says the next sort of spiritual piece within the sheep is the Manomaya Kosha, right? And there what I would ask of the topic is that how do I get to it where I'm starting to see an identity? There is something of an identification, right? When people fight, and if I were to make some statement random out here, okay, excuse me, but if I just made some statement that, oh, people of this community are all stupid, those who identify themselves with that community are going to get triggered. That is something that exists in that person. The other people are like, pata nahi kiske baare mein baat kiya? Right? So And then I will ask you, okay, now stop killing me, but just answer, what is it that you are connecting to? What is it in you that you are connecting to? And going into that gives you greater and greater understanding of the metal and the material of your spirit. Right? And that's what is this, the Manomaya portion. Then we come into what's called as the Vijnanamaya portion. Right? Anyonantara Atma Vijnanamaya. Right? Now, this is not science. Just because it's got the word Vijnana in it doesn't mean it's science. Right? Please, let's be very clear. These are the kind of oversimplifications I'm a little worried about. Right? This Vijnanamaya Kosha is basically discrimination. The classification, the very subtle, the nuanced classifications that I would do to be able to grapple with something. And I'm looking at a topic and I'm saying, okay, wait, this is showing these qualities, it must be this. This is showing this quality, so it belongs to this. Right? All the taxonomies that are being built, right, Bloom's or any of those things, were operating at this level. They were trying to look at a human being, their skills, and then classifying them. Oh, this is this. So there is no this is a better skill in that. These are all different skills. So Bloom's levels unfortunately suffers from a lot of people saying, oh, this is the lowest level and this is the highest level. You watch a child, the child is operating at level 6, right? You don't say, oh, wait a second, 1, 2 to हुआ ही नहीं अभी तक 6 में कैसे है, right? There is that. So these levels are different sets of cognitive skills, and there were objectives to be attained, and there was one school. Now again, just there, when Bloom's was done, Marzano, DOK, a lot of soul, all of these people created their response to this taxonomy, right? We are willing to study those because it's again being done, so-called in a scientific way. It is scientific, no questions about it. This too was done in a very scientific way, right? But we are not willing to study this, all the pramanas, to see whether those are helping us much better than the Bloom's taxonomies. Because I don't know why there are innumerous workshops on Bloom's taxonomy that have happened across schools, and still it seems like everyone are grappling with it. So maybe these things will just be accessible. The last one, Anandamaya, which is Anyonantara Anandamaya, which doesn't mean bliss. Well, Anand, yes, is bliss and all of that stuff, but there is a state at which you come to where there is no binding, there's no emotional binding, because you've gone beyond discrimination. You've gone beyond nuanced classification, right? That's very much the state, because that's the flow state that you keep hearing about, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi talks about, right? And it's very similar to what representatives of the armed forces talked about. When I am with the team, I am in a state of flow. I am now connected to something beyond me, my preference. I like baby pink more than blue. I'm beyond all of that. I'm operating in such a state that I'm focused and I'm getting it done. That state brings joy. It brings peace to some people, it brings calm to some people, it brings a sense of completion to some people. It brings different states of being. But that's the operating state at which, correct me if I'm wrong, at the highest element you are there. You're no longer divisive. You are in an entirety of you is undivided and it's working. To be able to come to that state is what is the exploration that has happened, which has taken you into the Anandamaya portion. Right? And at this time of a topic, of a study topic, you typically ask, what is it? And this is when you start seeing bigger patterns. You go into the meta pattern. You go into the metacognitive state of understanding, why am I studying this thing? Why is it that historically this happened or that happened? Yes?
Is there a linearity to this? I suspect not, correct me please.
As presented in the Taittiriya Upanishad, because it's page after page, there is a linearity that is coming up. Now, because it is of the spirit, the linearity seems to have been felt to be inevitable, right? Because until my basic needs are met, I am not even going to talk philosophy. See, a hungry man has no purpose for philosophy. So until I get that, and I am in a state where I am willing to explore, will I reach a state of asking these questions, and I say, where is the spirit of man? What is it? Where is it? And then I say, the source of it is your nourishment. I say, okay, but I'm nourished, but then I'm still doing something more. I'm just not just a nourished bunch of cells. What am I? Who am I? Where am I? Where is this me? And I keep asking this, and there is this flow inward to this. So in that sense,
Can
there
it
is a
not be
linearity.
reversed?
Can it not be reversed by starting with this? See, if you start with this, there is no compulsion in you to go to the Annamaya Kosha.
Probably
Because see, then,
it's still.
see, this is what I'm saying. This is why, because it is presented, it is still something you need to realize. I'll tell you why. If you just look at Annamaya Kosha alone, the simple realization of that is, oh, we are made of food. Very simple realization, right? If I were to say that's not the only thing, you are all of the stardust that exist. This is something that's very difficult for you to grapple. Now, when you talk about paint and color, a lot, there's this whole very interesting article that went up that barns, like wood sheds and barns, are largely painted red. That's because the substances, the pigments that come out, the maximally easily available pigment is that of red. Why? Because of the way the earth was formed. Why? Because it comes as this planet away from the sun. Why? Because this is how it's combined. So if you trace a simple thing of why is red paint the most commonly used paint on barns, it traces all its way up to stardust. Your food, your lunch today, your paneer, how many of us are able to trace it all the way to stardust? We are able to trace at best to the kitchen. We need to go beyond that. And it's no longer just a thing of saying, oh, okay, stardust. This thing is stardust. Because then that realization, which is a very transformative effect, it's not a cognitive thing, it's a transformative. And when you realize that everything on your plate is eventually sunbeam, but I mean not this today's lunch, I mean anyway, is essentially coming from the sun and stardust, then you have the substrate ready to make other statements like Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Without that realization, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is like, it's okay, it's a very cool thing to say, I don't feel it. The minute I realize that everything in me is that, and that is who you are, and we are all just stardust, I have absolutely no reason to feel any divisive energy between you and me. There is no element in me left to want to hurt you. Very much. Very much. And actually the Taittiriya Upanishad goes beyond that. It says, okay, but there's someone who's feeling that bliss. Who's beyond that? And at that time the Taittiriya Upanishad stays silent. It says, just figure it out yourself.
Excuse me, sir. Sir, I would like to ask you the last question. Firstly, I would like to appraise you for such a great knowledge you have shown here. I would like to have a praise for sir because you have such a great knowledge I can see. But sir, I would like to ask you a basic question as far as my point of view is concerned. I would like to ask you a question on the theme of today, the Vedas to Metaverse. I would like to ask you a basic question that in Vedas what we found, there is such kind of spirituality are there. The students are not making comparison. A materialistic mindset have been created in today's era. What we found? Let me give you an example. Suppose two persons are preparing for IITs, JEE Mains. What is happening with the students? If they do not crack, I will take a little time, just 2 minutes. If they do not crack the entrance examination, they make suicide. But in Vedas period, what we found, there is a kind of spirituality is there. If the students might fail in the exam, students might not getting the concept, they are not adversely affected in terms of their psychology. But now today in 21st century, what is happening right now, in this particular era, people become more materialistic, people become more capitalistic, and that is adversely affected our youth. That is because they are making suicide and many reasons to come. So I would like to ask you a simple question that as far the new education policy is concerned, what can we do for such a student so that they can go out of the materialistic and capitalistic mindset? They do not do comparison. They can survive in this world in a very peaceful manner. What can we do through this new education policy, and what we learn from the Vedas we can implement into the 21st century?
Just one second, just a sec. Can I please request everyone? Anand hasn't finished his session. I would request you, we are positively going to give some time for Q&A. Can I please request Anand first to finish his session? Thank you so much. Please,
Yeah.
please have it.
I will come back to it, don't worry. Right? So this is the Anandamaya Kosha, right? How is it that I can be See, remember the literature of this land produced some things like this, which is frankly speaking secular, right? And I can also establish for you as to why is this secular, right? It also has produced lesser-developed things, which are things like the Mimamsa, which talks about how do you go about doing your duties. There's everything. The literature of this land is just maddeningly wide. There's just a lot of things that are available, right? But this is right now focusing on how is it that I can keep going into the core of a substance topic, correct? And this is where we come to a state where we're at that state of a topic where I'm no longer hating. I don't have a state of saying like what many of us say, I don't get maths. I won't be in that state. Because I'm right at that stage where I am now entirely able to see numeracy, patterns, everything in their state. Right? Now when Ramanujam, when he kept saying that he got these visions from the Namakkal Tayar Singh temple, that's really being in this state. You are in this very different operative vibrational zone where you're able to connect with the world and receive from it without any kind of barrier, right? So this is a state we should aspire for. It's not something that comes after a 21-day regime or any such thing. It's not the way it works, right? Please bear with that. And that is why maybe it looks inaccessible, but it's definitely worth aspiring towards. I think this is what started it all. This was a piece of work that I had published a while ago, and I'm so happy to see a lot of the titles of the column used in the sub-themes of this conference. When I got the itineraries, when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is so much fun. Good. So this is of the way, the Panchadi, the Pramanas, the Panchakoshas, right? Each one of them is with a question that as a teacher, as an educator, I asked myself, right? So if you look at, I just randomly, let's just look at Upamana, right? Now Upamana Pramana is a way of which you do it. And the question I'm asking myself is, how might we set up the known elements to identify patterns, contrasts, to enable a comparative study, right? And that is, and in answer to Arnab's question as well, I didn't want to take up the time when he was talking about the tools for curiosity and the tools for Pravasa, all of those things. These are the kind of, the tools would be the questions, which is rightly pointed to by the gentleman who was, I think, there. So you have these questions, and you need to feel it. It's not something that you're going to get an Arihant publication for. You will not get it. It's something you need to feel from within, because that's when you start seeing the essence of life. You start seeing the essence of every certain thing, right? And this is one thing, this is where it all started. And it's amazing. So we can explore each of these things separately, but just in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the thing. I'm just going to conclude with certain things that I'd like to wrap up with. One is, whatever I can find in my scope of exploration that helps me improve the learning experience for the child and the learning for the child is legit. It has to be admitted, it has to be explored and understood. To say that, wait, it has got a lot of Sanskrit, so it probably comes with an agenda, that's ridiculous, right? We were willing to accept the Greeks. None of us here are worshipping Zeus, right? So let's be very clear. We are, the language or the text from which something comes isn't a reason to accept it or deny. Now, the thing at the other end of the spectrum is that teacher who will say, oh, see, this thing came from Sanskrit, so then we should then say that this is greater than Ramayana and Mahabharata, where we landed up in Egypt. And don't do those things also, right? Stay within a rational space. We as teachers should be, and none of these things really go to the student. I think that was a question to you in the morning, as to how do we explain these to students, how do we get students to access. We never go and tell the student, okay, by the way, you are right now in Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. So please stand there. You're too proximal to me. You don't say these things. We don't do these things. We are working, but we have a language of how do we work. And in that language, in that vocabulary of how we work, we can definitely have Piaget, we can also have Panchakosha. They both start with a P. Though, of course, there's an orthogonal dissonance in French words. They are pronounced differently. Ours is pronounced as it is. The second thing is, ideally, learning experiences should be sort of culturally, socially accessible. Something that I know of. Swati ma'am is not here, but I remember there was this one particular thing where you have this nursery rhyme of sorts which says, "Rain, rain, go away, come again another day." Right? In Marathi, there's this thing of "Ye re pausa, tula je paisa." Right? In an agrarian society like ours, "rain, rain, go away" is never going to be on anybody's mouth. We need the rains. Right? So "Ye re pausa" makes a lot more sense. Which one do we adopt? That's up to the teachers. And so if you've got these two in place, then this is what I'd like to sort of present to you as an option, right? We need to understand what has existed because these things are relevant to our general being. If we believe that people here are more just sort of naturally spiritually inclined or naturally find consonance with spiritual topics and those kind of conversations, and that's just the material of this land, we don't have to be in denial. And again, going back to the AI thing, I'm saying the three things that are going to remain at the end of the AI age, one of them is definitely going to be your spirit. So might as well cultivate your spirit. And cultivating your spirit doesn't mean going and chanting something. There's a different thing too. There are two different things. Yeah, time is over. There you go. And questions? Yes? Yeah, any other questions is fine. Should I answer his JE one? Somebody asked for the JE one. What's it? So to your question, how do I ensure that students of this age turn up to be not inclined towards materialistic things, etc.? We've had a civilization that's existed for thousands and thousands of years which hasn't achieved it, and NEP is not going to achieve it. That's reality. But an education which cultivates this is why, if you notice, there were less seemingly money-minded people in the previous years. Even amongst teachers, we say there were teachers who just give. And today they'll say tuition ka 1 ghante ka 1000 rupees. Right? There's a general sense of, and again, that's why I go back to the earlier thing. When I talk about the grand generosity, it's not something that comes from textbooks. It's a culture thing. And I'm sure, sorry, again I'm going to embarrass you like thoroughly today. Like the Madhu family, what comes is a cultural thing, is a spirit that has been groomed so beautifully. I'm sure it will come to the students as well. And that is what we have to focus on. And that is really what the Panchakosha is trying to focus on, really. He's trying to say, okay, you will get your maths fine, you will get your job, you'll probably pass your JE. What is the harm in also going deeper into yourself? Or koi to nahi karne wala. Right? Unless someone's a surgeon around you, but it's a different. Alright, one more question and we wrap it up. One more question, folks, and we'll wrap it up. You'll have to raise your hand higher. These 3 lights are like determined to blind me. Yes.
In this materialistic world and the way you have explained, how do we shed our myths, mithyatva? Because this is what leads us to bad behavior or not realistic or not being able to appreciate the richness of the culture and the ancestry that goes with your presentation.
Yeah. So the answer to that actually starts from this, right? The very fact, this is not the result of someone deciding in the morning that they have to write an article for the Taittiriya Upanishad publication, right? This was, as is stated in the Taittiriya Upanishad, immense amount of tapas that was performed, and then this person came back saying that. And again with the Akbar Birbal story, if you're familiar, right, where Akbar's wife's brother wanted the job, and then Akbar sent him to ask, he comes back with just one answer, then Birbal goes and gets all the answers. It's like that. The tapas didn't just come back with Annamaya Kosha, and then you send the person back and say, do more tapas and get me the other koshas. The person went, came back and had this absolute clarity all the way up to Anandamaya. There was no ambiguity. And that is what is being shared in this dialogue. Right? So, to your question, how do we do it is by nurturing and creating space for going in. The minute a child says, but why ma'am? We shouldn't say, shut up. A. We shouldn't say this is out of syllabus. Right? We should take it on and make it a dialogue amongst the children and say, get everybody inculcated in the practice of going deeper into something. Because it's more than anything else, more than mobile screens, more than anything else, the lack of the ability to go deep is going to be our biggest undoing. That's all that I have.